Haggman, thank you for joining the show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And I love the studio. This is awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, again, like we're learning as we go here, but we have a cool space and we got great guests like you coming in and, learning and just figuring out how to do this, how to put on a show that people like listening to, and guests like you help.
Oh, dude, no, it is awesome. It's an honor to be here. How long's it been? When did you start with this?
So this podcast, we started, I guess, what was it? Really started filming like early December, maybe late November, early December.
Amazing.
Yeah. And
love it.
Yeah, just learning as we go. It's awesome. And just being able to sit down and, we were talking before we started filming about the flow state.
Yep.
Right. Getting into the flow state when you're talking with somebody and you just get in the zone. And
totally.
Time just ceases to exist. And
yeah. And this is it. No, I mean, that is the, it seems like the best things happen when you're actually not thinking about it.
Yes. For sure.
When a jump shot is falling, you're not thinking about the mechanics of the shot.
Very true.
It's just, you're just doing it.
You're in the zone.
You're in the zone.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we got a lot of cool stuff to talk about. We've known each other for a few years now.
Long time, man.
Yeah. In different capacities. You've always been somebody I've looked up to and admired for all the work you've done. Thank you. You did some amazing work at the Knight Foundation, supported a lot of great endeavors and a lot of cool initiatives, some of which,
Waffle Wednesday, brother. Yeah.
Absolutely. So for our listeners that don't know what Waffle Wednesday was or is, I think somebody else is taking over at this point, but we had a weekly tech networker, called Waffle Wednesday for the tech and entrepreneur scene in Miami. And every single Wednesday morning, we strived at least to put on a great event for the local scene where people can come and meet people and have breakfast and share their stories and share what they're working on and connect. And it happened very organically where we had just moved into this new space in Wynwood. We went to Target to get office supplies and we walked by a $5 waffle maker. And we said, well, it's $5. We got to pick it up, right? It's $5. Can't pass it up. So we brought it back to the office and we're like, okay, now what are we gonna do with this waffle maker, right? And Carolina, our director of marketing at the time, she said, oh, we can make it like a team building thing. Every week, instead of having breakfast at home, we could have breakfast here at the office and, we could just share stories and get to know each other better. And, that happened a few weeks later. People would just say, hey, I got a cousin that's working at the lab. Can they come over for Waffle Wednesday? Or I got a friend in town. And then just one day I looked around and there was 20 people that I didn't know looking for waffles. And I kind of figured out how to feed all these people. So that's when you and I
that's right.
You and I grabbed lunch coincidentally that week. And I said, Matt, I got to tell you about this thing that's kind of happening organically. We have this networker that's happening called Waffle Wednesdays. Would the Knight Foundation be interested in possibly supporting it? And I remember you were just like instantaneous. It was like, absolutely. How can we help? And that became a really cool event, I thought.
A really cool community event. I mean, one of the sort of convening, weekly events in the whole startup scene, it's still so important, but particularly at that point, there was just such a premium on finding ways to allow people to better connect.
Yeah.
And Waffle Wednesday was that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I thought it was a very cool, unpretentious way for people just to get into the scene and start meeting people.
It was inventive. It was fun. It was also meeting people at a sort of a different point in their week.
Yes.
Right. I mean, so many of the stuff we were doing at that time was in the evening.
Right.
If you have childcare issues, all of that, then that's a real problem. Well, what about then having a breakfast that goes into sort of mid-morning, kind of what to about 10, sort of wind it down there about, and it was perfect. Mm-hmm. And there was such amazing energy.
There was great energy.
By the way, your office was off the charts cool.
Yeah, that was a great space. I mean, we still have it, but we're winding it down now, unfortunately. I mean, but it served us well. We loved that. A lot of great memories there. And always
well,
grateful.
dude, your work has been pioneering work. I mean, both with Live Ninja to show that you can build a company here in Miami, but then while building a company, also finding ways to propel the ecosystem too.
Yes. I think that's a big thing. Well, at least it was for me, was the fact that like, hey, I'm very passionate. I'm born and raised here in Miami, but you don't have to be born and raised in Miami to have a passion for Miami. I mean, you're a great example of that. But I think it's important to really focus on the energy around your business, not just in your business, but cultivate the community around it. I think that there's like a compounding karma factor that happens when you care about the energy that's surrounding your business locally and in the community. And when you get your hands, dirty a little bit with what are the important things going on, what are the people around us care about, and how do we integrate our business into the community? I think a lot of cool things can happen. And I don't think a lot of entrepreneurs stop to think about that. And I think they should.
I think that's right. And I think you really struck the balance perfectly, because for a lot of entrepreneurs, it seemed on the one hand, a lot of the real high performers, the stars, they often weren't engaging in the ecosystem that much, which on the one hand, I totally get. They're trying to build a business,
sure, absolutely,
right? And so I understand that. But on the other hand, you can carve out a little time to engage. It makes a huge, huge difference. Now, on the other hand, also you would see examples of folks probably would overweight on engaging with the ecosystem and perhaps not spending enough time on building the business that is, ultimately, that is what, their time and effort is ultimately built on. How does that go? But you struck that balance, I thought, perfectly.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, Waffle Wednesday paid huge dividends in the sense that, well, for the community, first of all, people told me they met their co-founders at Waffle Wednesdays. They met investors at Waffle Wednesdays. For us, we did it just because, we wanted the community to have a place and we wanted to meet people. But, Live Ninja became very well known because of it, because a lot of people came to our office, and we hired some of our best engineers of people that came for waffles and just never left, Like, what do you do here? Oh, we're a tech company. Oh, that's awesome. What do you do? And you start talking about it like, well, I'm a software engineer. Are you looking for any talent? Like, absolutely, sit down. And they sit down with Emilio, our CTO, while they're eating waffles for the interview.
That's awesome.
It was amazing.
And by the way, sick waffles.
Yeah, they were great.
I love, what was it, like Tuesday had the reveal, or was it Wednesday?
Yeah, Tuesday night we would say what the waffle of the week was. So, I mean, we did it up. Shout out to Fonz, right, for the red velvet waffles with strawberries and the s'mores waffles with the blowtorch and all that.
Amazing.
He did a great job. He did a great job. So again, thank you for all your support on that.
No, man. Thank you.
And I want to talk about, your journey and how that led you into your role at Night. I mean, you've had a very interesting and exciting career. I mean, you started off, right? You were a reporter at the Herald.
Yep.
And then, worked at Knight Foundation, the program director for the Miami program. And then you ran for Congress.
Yep. So, ran for Congress.
You did a lot and a lot of different aspects.
And even before that, lived in New Orleans trying to write a book about this rhythm and blues piano player.
Oh, wow.
That's still, I mean, I have 10 boxes sitting in my house right now of research from that time. Bartended at night to make ends meet.
That's crazy.
But yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun.
I want to hear
lots to come.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I want to hear about all that stuff. Let's start with your upbringing, right? You grew up in Boston?
Grew up in Boston, Cambridge, Mass.
Nice.
And went to Cambridge Fringe and Latin High School, the proud home of Patrick Ewing.
Yeah.
Who went on to have Hall of Fame career in the NBA. Now in Miami, and this will be, next year it'll be 20 years in Miami, which is my home. It's big Kane fan.
What brought you to Miami in the first place?
Love the Marlins too. So I arrived here in December of 2001, and I'd gone off to law school. From Boston, went to Tulane University, and then went over and backpacked around Europe, and Tulane's down in New Orleans, and then went back to New Orleans for a couple of years for this book project. Went to law school, still figuring out what really want to do, and it's during law school that I decided what I really want to do. I want to be a journalist. In my second year of law school, I did some stories for a local paper, and I'd always dabbled in journalism. And I thought, I love this. And so I thought, I'm going to finish, I'm going to get my JD. But when I get out, I'm going to go try and find a job in journalism. And so it's funny, at that time, that's when we had the whole .com crash, right? So I remember I get out I graduate from law school and then start looking around for a job in journalism. I remember an editor telling me, "You've picked the absolute worst time to look for a job in journalism." Of course, I look back on that conversation. I think to myself, "Well, just wait. It's going to get worse." Yeah. And boy, it's gotten pretty tough. But it was funny at the time. I had taken a trip my third year of law school down to Chile, and I had this amazing time. And I was flying back and was connecting planes in Miami. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so upon graduation, I want to be a journalist. the thought was, well, how can I leverage the law degree to get into journalism? So I thought, well, work as a legal affairs reporter. And then I thought to myself, well, how can I get, this trip I just had was so incredible. How can I get some of that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually wrote down in my journal, I want to be a legal affairs reporter in Miami.
Very specific.
So very specific.
Yeah.
Still not out of law school, but
Yep.
a couple months away from graduation. So I graduate and start looking and find it's very hard. This conversation with this one editor saying you've picked the absolute worst
Yep.
time to be trying to do this. And so went through the summer, no job. Went into the fall, no job. Visited friends in DC and Atlanta and some different spots, looked around in those places to see stuff, and it just felt like one dead end after another. And then I was on this website, journalismjobs.com. And I'm scrolling through, and there I see legal affairs reporter in Miami.
Wow.
And it was at this small paper called the Daily Business Review. And I thought, wow.
Yeah.
This has to be
Meant
it.
to be, yeah.
This has to be it.
Yep.
And so I applied. And then I remember I was in, this is like when I was bopping around different cities, and I was in Atlanta in this apartment with zero furniture, right? And sitting there, and I had submitted, they had me do a story. They had there are three finalists, each do a story. And I'd submitted it, and it came back from the editor. And there were so many edits on it, I thought to myself, I'm never getting this job. And I remember that night, just went to bed, just so despondent. Like, man, when is this going to turn? But I got up in the morning and made all the edits and submitted it. And then it was, a couple days later, the phone rang. And it was a landline phone. I remember, sitting on the floor
Sure.
in the corner of the apartment, and picked it up. It was a guy named Harris Meyer, who was my direct editor at the Daily Business Review at the time. The editor-in-chief was a guy named David Lyons, just amazing people. And Harris said, Matt, we'd love for you to come down.
Amazing.
And so I packed, at the time I had this old, fairly beat up Toyota Tercel, and packed everything I had, because at the time I'd been going to these different places with just all my belongings in my car.
Yep.
Right. And off, I remember it was super early in the morning, because I was going to try to, just make the trip from Atlanta to drive down to Miami, and pulled out of Atlanta before the sun had come up to come down to Miami.
All right. So you're in Miami, in this new city, really excited, and you're starting this new job, and off to the races.
Yeah. And I loved it. And I found Miami, and to this day find Miami to be endlessly interesting.
Yep.
And just this, immediately had this sense of discovery. And it's never left.
Yep.
And after it been, my thought was, hey, gosh, I guess I was at the review for a little over a year. It was a year and a half by this point. And I I thought to myself, well, if you want to be a reporter in a city, then the place to be would be at the Miami Herald.
Mm-hmm.
And so so as it happened, I think it was a little less than 2 years in, my then girlfriend, now wife, Danette, we're invited to this reception, and we go to it, and seated one seat away from us is the publisher of the Miami Herald, a person named Alberto Ibargüen. And said hello, and he was, his normal self, just so chatty and engaging, and very warm, and talking, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is where I want to go work. And he got up to go get something from the bar or the buffet or whatever, and I turned to Danette and I said, I guess this is my opportunity. So I got up and walked over to him. So it's just he and I, rather than, the conversation around the whole table. And I said, Mr. Ibargüen, I said, I want to come work for you.
Just outward, just said it right out. Yep.
Straight out. And he had a great answer. He said, let's get to know each other. And I said, okay, great.
Yep.
And
I'm Matt.
That's it. And so breakfast was arranged.
Nice.
And we went to this restaurant called Baleen over on Grove Isle, where he lives, and started talking. And one thing led to another, and job searches always seems like they take longer than you hope.
Yep.
But as it happened, went through a whole bunch of interviews, and then the next thing you know, got a phone call and say, "Hey, we'd love for you to come over to to the Miami Herald."
Very cool. And Ace is obviously excited about that, right? I gave you a pat on the back.
Ace is the best. Man. Ace is the best.
Yeah, he's a good support dog.
He really is.
So you started at the Herald. What year was this?
So this is 04 now.
Okay.
So it's beginning I guess like certainly the first half of 04.
And were you covering similar stuff that you were before with legal affairs, or
so they had me now covering real estate?
Real estate,
right?
Okay.
So and I went from covering real estate, then I worked as an investigative reporter, and then my last beat was covering the Miami-Dade County Commission, right?
Cool.
And it was you put all of that together. It was like this. It was this incredible graduate course in Miami, essentially,
that
right?
really
Where you
gives you
can
a
really
good-
see under the hood,
For sure.
following lawyers around, developers around, and then local politicians around. It was like you're seeing how the sausage is made.
Absolutely.
And and all the while, it just made me love Miami even more. Just found it such a fascinating place, in part because what quickly became apparent was that so many cities, there's sort of an established group that are essentially running the place. And what I found in Miami is that, all institutions here are relatively young. And Miami had long moved away from, what used to be called the non-group years ago, where there was sort of this core group of, of local leaders. And now it was sort of this distributed sort of environment where there was room really for anyone to be a leader. And that really intrigued me. I think for some people, and I'm not sure quite why, lots of people have said, that must have been such a hard transition going from Boston to Miami. And for whatever reason, it just felt very intuitive. It didn't feel much of a leap at all. And in part, and for whatever reason, Miami being this place where it's wide open.
Yeah, it's a very welcoming city also,
It's a hugely welcoming
and it's
city.
still trying to figure out who it is, right?
100%.
So there's a lot of open arms for putting your fingerprint on the city.
100%. And that so intrigued me. That it's like that it's this place that's at such a formative stage of its development.
Yep.
And yet we all have the opportunity to put our own imprint, to make our own contribution and sort of and shaping or pushing the trajectory of this really remarkable place.
Yep.
And so during my time there, first was covering developers, then partnered with a couple of other reporters on with Jack Dolan is the one who led the whole effort. Partnered with him, reporters now at the LA Times. And we did a whole series on mortgage fraud, looking into how essentially state regulators were looking the other way, as all during the rise up of the housing boom.
Yep.
Just anyone who wanted to sell a mortgage could.
Yep.
And of course, that led to a mortgage fraud skyrocketing across the state. In fact, we were the leader in the country at the time.
Right.
Then my last beat went over and covered local government, and that was a really interesting time because that's at a time when we wrote all these stories that led to the recall of the Miami-Dade County mayor, the largest recall of a locally elected mayor ever in the country. Reporting that that led to the first defeat of an incumbent county commissioner in 16 years, and ultimately all of those things happening led to the adoption of term limits, which later this year will result in the biggest change in the county commission in terms of members, in terms of political leadership, that we've probably seen in a generation.
Wow.
But I loved all of that. But meanwhile, I had just grown such a love and attachment for Miami, and I wanted, I enjoyed all the stories we were doing. So much of journalism is about sort of righting a wrong and highlighting those things that aren't quite right, whether it's writing investigative stories on mortgage fraud or all the work about sort of the dysfunction and self-dealing in county government. I enjoyed doing all of that, and that watchdog journalism really excited me. But honestly, I also wanted to be part of sort of trying to push our community forward in a way. And good journalism and watchdog journalism does do that. But I think you know what I mean. Like, be part of something.
There's a different scale. There's a different level of impact that you could have personally put your own mark on it.
100%.
Yep.
And also as a journalist, you write the story, and then it's really on the community then to choose to react to that or not.
Right.
Rather than, what I more and more sought was, this is a place I love. I want to be able to be more proactive in driving the sort of change that I think is important for our community. And so in 2011, it was Manny Diaz, the former mayor of Miami. He sent me an email. He's a neighbor. He lives in the Grove, and he sent me an email with a job description for Miami program director at Knight Foundation. I remember looking at that and thinking, what does a program director do at Knight Foundation? What? And so, and I remember thinking, I'm happy. Yeah. I'm happy here. But everyone in the newsroom at the time, you could see the trends, right? The newsroom was shrinking. Yeah. Yep. The industry is going through these wrenching changes. And I think any reporter is thinking about, what's next?
Yep.
And for many friends had gone on to other papers. I mean, I mentioned Jack Dolan, who, worked with on the series Borrowers Betrayed. He's now at the LA Times. Mike Sala, the Pulitzer Prize winner, who was our editor for Borrowers Betrayed. He went off to DC, and he's since come back, but he's, and back and forth to DC, going up to the Washington Post. I wanted to stay in Miami, right? And I wanted to find a way to be, to be a part of the community and trying to drive some really interesting and positive change. And so when I first looked at this, I thought, it was Javier Soto, who was then the CEO of the Miami Foundation, called up. It was about a week after Manny had sent the job description. And Javi said, you need to think about this. This is a really interesting role. Mm-hmm. This is something where you can do a lot of good, and you don't just sort of let this go without giving this some real consideration. So I did. And as it happened, the recruiter had called me up looking for names. And before I actually returned his call, he then called back and saying, well, I'm told you might be interested in this. And we went to breakfast at Green Streets in the Grove. Yep,
classic.
And he, Henry Scott was his name. He was great. And he said, so would you be, think you'd be at a place where you'd be ready to leave the Miami Herald to go to Knight Foundation? And I said, yes. And I said it in a way I thought to myself, I don't know if I believe me, so I hope he believes me.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another, and got the opportunity to go to Knight Foundation. It's funny when I got the call, and it was Trabian Shorters, mm-hmm. Who's now launched Be Me, who was my direct report, my boss at Knight Foundation. He's the one who called and said, Matt, we'd love to have you.
Awesome.
It was funny that day when I was a reporter and doing my last beat covering the county. I had this person who would always call me, this source, who I never knew who he was, from a payphone. I remember thinking, where are you finding this payphone to call from?
Yeah.
And at the time, too, I remember things got really contentious with the mayor at the time, Mayor Carlos Alvarez. And I remember one time, in fact, I had sent an email. You want me to tell a quick story?
Sure, yeah,
okay.
Please, yeah.
So I was writing, had been doing a series of stories about self-dealing by the county mayor, Carlos Alvarez. And the first story that came out was called "The Mayor's Big Race Club." In the middle of the recession, it found out that he had actually, when he's calling for belt tightening, across the community, he had actually given these double-digit % pay increases to his inner circle, and that led to this uproar in the community when we published that story, and then came back with a few more stories along the same lines, and as it happened, finishing a story, and we need to get comment from the mayor. And I'm on the phone with his spokesperson, and I'm on the phone with his spokesperson, and the spokesperson and my editor, I'm writing an email to my editor saying I'm going to run down to County Hall to try and get comment, but I'm sure the comment will be pretty vanilla. Well, before I press send, in the 2-line to the email, I then insert the name of the person who I'm talking to.
Oh, wow.
The spokesperson for the mayor. I send it.
Yeah.
I went, oh, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I get to County Hall. She says, and this person remains a great friend. And she said, we saw that email. And I said, well, do you have any comment? Said no. Well, next day, as it happens, a press conference is called where the mayor says, in my, when I was running, there was a reporter I could never do anything right. And it turned out that reporter's parents were fundraising for my competitor. Well, it's happened again.
Oh, wow.
And yesterday, my spokesperson got an email from this reporter who said that my comments would be pretty vanilla. And in back of him during this press conference was a line of police officers. And it was sort of wow. And sort of got through that. Obviously it was a mistake sending that email.
Sure.
But the stories were spot on.
That's awesome.
They were accurate. It was accurate reporting. Well, as it happened, after that, I'm getting these calls from someone from this payphone, this source, who finally then says to me, and as it happens, we go forward. Finally, there's the recall, and a new mayor is elected, who is Carlos Jimenez, who's now finishing out his last term. And this person calls me and says, we should meet, and I should tell you who I am. And I said, okay. So I met him for breakfast down in South Miami. And he said, in the force, when you do a good job, we give you a pen. And he said, here's your pen. And he said, and I just want to tell you, he said, job well done.
Nice.
And I was so moved by that. And I got in my car and I was driving back to the Herald that morning, and Trabian Shorters called and said, you want to come to Knight Foundation?
Amazing. Wow. Great story. And that was 2011, you said?
So that was 2011, yeah.
Okay.
2011. And then got to Knight, and so Alberto, who had been publisher of the Miami Herald, is now is now the CEO and president of Knight Foundation.
Yep.
And I get there, and Alberto said to me, he said, go talk to people for 4 months and tell me what we should do next in Miami. Blank slate.
So this was, again, the Knight Foundation works in a way where each of its local divisions can choose what the focus of that location should be. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So the Knight Fund, established by two newspaper publishers, Jack and Jim Knight, who have since passed away, but in their day built the largest newspaper chain in the country. And they ultimately sold that. And that's where the money comes from.
Right.
That's where the endowment comes from, is selling newspapers all over the country. And the mission of the foundation is promoting informed and engaged communities. And it works in 3 areas: one in journalism, one in the arts, and then one in the 26 communities where the brothers used to publish papers. And in 8 of them, Knight has a program director. And the job of the program director is to come up with a focused strategy that is relevant to that place, right? That will, in its way, help create a more informed and engaged community.
Right, because each city's different, has its own needs, different DNA, right?
That was the great insight of the Knight brothers, is that, that one size does not fit all. Places are different.
Right.
And the foundation should reflect that.
Yep.
And furthermore, they set up a foundation where they weren't prescriptive about what the foundation has to do going forward, other than continue to work in the communities, in some capacity that the Knight brothers publish papers. That was it. So they were saying, look, the foundation will change. And Knight had not worked in entrepreneurship before. And so, went and looked around and came back and said, and the great thing during that period that was so helpful was with Trabian and Alberto and Dennis Scholl, who was then running the night arts program, and his office was right next to mine. What they all said to me was, they said, be focused, right? If you try to be all things to all people, you'll ultimately be nothing. I mean, Dennis said to me, you have to own something.
Sure. You can't be a mile wide and an inch deep on anything.
No, man.
Right?
So it's like he said, when you walk into a room, you want everyone to know what you're about. And he said, and if you can boil it down to a word, even better. And that was such an important insight. And so that was I was thinking about. I was thinking what to focus on. What can we boil down to a word? And so in looking around more and more, this whole idea about about building an entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Miami.
What really spawned that? What really was like a genesis of like, wow, there's something here, entrepreneurs and innovating in like just investing in innovation and technology. Like, what was those initial signals that you picked up on that you're like, oh, there's something here, I need to look more into it?
Yeah. So one was just, you're seeing this global trend, right? I mean, the cost to creator going down, so the ability to act and drive transformational change is going up on an individual level, right? And we're beginning to, and while there are these centers of innovation globally in a big, big way, beginning to see some complementary centers of innovation, and then thinking, Miami could be one of those places. I was reading at this time during this, 4 or so month period of walkabout and discovery. I was reading a blog post by Paul Graham, who started Y Combinator, and in it, Graham talked about how do you create other Silicon Valleys, and talking about actually in a lot of ways there's a need for it, but saying if they are to happen, how would they happen? Right. And he said essentially it comes down to 2 things, as he put it in sort of a flippant way, but he said it comes down, you need to have rich people and nerds. Right. Right?
I remember that blog post.
Right?
Yep.
Right? And in it, he said, for instance, Miami will never be one of those places because Miami has a lot of rich people but doesn't have the nerds. Right. But I thought, he wrote that, as I recall, in 2006. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting here reading this now. This is like January of 2012, right? Thereabouts. And it was Alex Stanchoff, who's an entrepreneur here in Miami, who had sent me the blog post and said, dude, you got to check this out. And Alex had a really important role, because it was when I was thinking about presenting this idea to Alberto, I remember talking to him and he was like, yeah, go for it. There's a there. Nice. I thought to myself, if someone like that in those early days had said, dude, don't bother. Yeah. That would have carried a lot of weight, because there weren't a lot of people saying this is the path you should go down. So in any event, what Paul Graham wrote was, he said, well, Miami won't be one of those places, but what are the things that cities need that want to attract these people? As he put it, the nerds. Yep. And he said there were 3 things. He said, number 1, you need a vibrant center of art and culture, right? A vibrant cultural scene. Number 2, he said, you need density. You need a community that's not all sprawled out, there.
Urban dense areas.
You need urban dense areas. Yep. And then 3, he said, you need to have sort of the basis of really strong higher education, right? Sort of a strong network of institutions of higher education. Right. And I thought to myself, well, when he wrote this back in 2006, probably was pretty good. You could argue a good case to be made that maybe we're not quite there. But I thought to myself, okay, here we are 6 years later. And, and even though it hasn't been that long, you could make a case on all of those points. When I was a real estate reporter, from 2004 to about 2007 at the Herald, I covered that, how the city was being remade, how we were seeing, I remember writing about, some of the first residential developments in downtown Miami. Yep. In years, in some parts of downtown where there had never been residential development, right? And so I thought, well, I've reported on and seen these changes and how our community is changing. Meanwhile, of course, we're in the midst of what has been this cultural renaissance in our community. I mean, just from an institutional level, we've seen 4 different going back when the Arch opened in 06, I think, thereabouts.
Yep.
And
there.
we've seen, Arch, New World Symphony, Frost, PAM, they've all opened their doors, right, to new facilities, to say nothing of seeing communities revitalize through the arts, right? And so I thought, and then you looked at, the growth of FIU, Miami-Dade College, the largest and most diverse campus-based college in the country, all of that. And I thought, you know what? There's a real, the elements are all here.
Yes.
Meanwhile, a highly entrepreneurial place. And in fact, Kaufman was already coming out with studies showing that in terms of business formation, Miami, some years was among the leaders in the country.
This is a city built on entrepreneurs.
Built on entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so the thinking was, but at the time, everyone's talking about brain drain.
Right.
That was the constant, refrain, brain drain. And so I thought, what if we could build an ecosystem that builds on these amazing assets? All right, and let's not forget, international city, so dynamic, enormous population growth, drawing people from many parts of the world. What if you build an ecosystem on top of these amazing assets, but build an ecosystem focused on supporting high growth entrepreneurs? Right, so we build on this great asset, highly entrepreneurial place. This is not a place like a lot of communities. You're trying to build an entrepreneurial instinct and all of that. This was that's there, but now we're going to try and build on that to build an ecosystem to help scale ideas in a big way. And so it was in thinking this through to go present this to Alberto and Trabian. The key person was Ben Wers, and you remember Ben.
Yeah, sure.
And I remember it was, first he was at a role at the time in Knight Foundation where his job was to help all the different program officers, and whether it's in arts or communities or journalism, to think through their ideas, and he was almost like an in-house sort of strategic consultant.
Yep.
And the moment sat down with Ben to talk through it, it immediately struck me that this is the greatest strategic thinker and clearest thinker. I mean, that's such a skill to be able to take, a thought and break it down in sort of clear component parts.
Yep.
And so Ben was the one. I said, okay, what's the aim here? And Ben was the one who said, we want to make Miami more of a place where ideas are built. I thought, yeah, that's it. And
it's powerful.
And so went and presented it to Alberto, and I think there were a lot of good questions about whether this made sense. I mean, the crazy thing at that time is if we had decided to do something else, no one would have cared. I mean, none of the, you know what I mean? And you think of all those things that happened, many of those wouldn't.
There was a lot of thirst
and
at the time for something like this that could actually get behind entrepreneurs and get behind innovation and technology and really put some muscle behind it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so with that, we were off and running. We did 3 experiments to test it.
Yep.
We did a grant to 500 startups. It had which did a thing called Geeks on a Plane.
Yeah.
They might still be doing it. Remember that?
Yeah, very, very. Yeah.
And then we sponsored Ashoka had a conference and just wanted to sort of check out the scene. And then we sponsored a panel discussion, and I moderated it. And the goal was, let's just see who comes.
Right.
And what's the conversation.
Yep.
And the room was packed. No one left. You could sense, to your point, this enormous thirst.
Yep.
And so with that, we thought, all right, let's go. And so it was summer of 2012, sat down with Nancy Dahlberg to announce this new program, launching in Miami, focused on building Miami, helping build Miami's entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Amazing. And then off to the races.
It was
incredible.
Off to the races.
It was incredible.
Yeah. And this was to me, that was an important lesson, and that there was something really good about putting a stake in the ground. In this case, sitting down with Nancy, who who had, after those first couple of things we'd done, she'd said, what are you guys up to? And she said, when you're ready to really say, announce what you guys are doing, let me know. And so we went and sat down and said, here's what we're going to do. And so there's a story that essentially is the day one of the whole effort as it's, officially underway. And there's something really good about that that's actually helpful. I think you're declaring, saying, here's what we're going to do. Now, like anything, it's not a straight line. You're going to iterate. There are going to be some changes, all of that. But nevertheless, generally, what the effort, what you're shooting towards by declaring it and saying it publicly, I now look back on that was a good thing.
Yeah.
And so
It was a seminal moment.
yeah.
Yep.
And so, and just being really clear, like, here's what we're after, and then suddenly you find, as time went by, I found that there were a lot of people across the community who wanted to do the same thing. And then, and then it became this, what I think it became, and what remains, this collective effort across the community.
For sure. How do you think about, in your experience, engaging a community? It's a very tall task. How do you get out there and really meet the community, get them involved, get them behind what you're doing, and make sure that you're serving them in a way in which they want to be served? What are some of those lessons that you've learned as far as community engagement?
I think it's all about meeting people where they are. I'll never forget when I was leaving the Herald to go to Knight Foundation. My mom said to me, "Now you're going to be a suit." And I'd never worn suits before. So at night, suddenly, the dress code there really is, wearing suits and ties and all that stuff. And she said to me, "But don't forget what made you a good reporter. Being out in the community, being on the corner, meeting people where they are." And that's the way, I tried to go about my job at Knight Foundation. Is that I think it's built on constant community engagement. Right. And that's being both out in the community. I would often say the job at Knight is not a job you work, it's a job you live. Right. Because weekends, evenings, all of that.
Yep.
But that's really important. It's also, I'd say, generally speaking, for things like foundations, it's also very easy for foundations to sort of be removed from the community it's trying to serve. And so I think it's especially important for people working at foundations, and something that I was really conscious of, is you want to be constantly out there, constantly engaging, have those ongoing feedback loops. And that, that requires being out in the community. Did things too at Knight. Like, one of the things started doing is would do just a breakfast every 2 weeks.
I remember that.
Where, and that started first to solve a problem that I was figuring out how to solve. And that was, I was getting a lot of requests from people saying, "So what are you up to in Miami? What's this effort around supporting entrepreneurship?" And so I found I was having lots of meetings where I was sort of running through saying the same things.
Right.
And I found I could fill up a week doing that.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, well, what about, all these meetings? What about if we just picked a time, every other week where, could talk about, with a group, not too big enough so everyone could participate in the conversation, a round table.
Yep.
And I could share what we're up to, but then get feedback.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, the people who are there, they can connect with each other.
Yeah.
And so started doing that. And, the rule for that whole effort was essentially that no one was invited, right? And by that I mean that it wasn't like, this wasn't curated, right? The whole effort was built on the idea that we at Knight Foundation, myself, we don't know where the best ideas are, right? And so it's all about being open to as many people as possibly can. The only thing we did is try to limit the numbers for each of them, so people who came could participate in the conversation and not feel like they were stuck in the back, right? That was it. And I knew as time went by, that there would be, it got so 4/5 of the people around the table, and we would always start by everyone just introducing themselves briefly. I had never met before, right? And I thought, now we're really getting someplace, because by virtue of the work at the Herald and at Knight, it's just by virtue of that work, you build lots of relationships across the community just because of the nature of those jobs,
Definitely.
right? And so, but one of the things I think you can fall into, people say Miami's a small town. And in many respects you can make that case, but my thought is when people say it's a small town and everyone knows everyone, what I think internally is, we'll go look around. Because what I found is that, in fact, Miami, there's so many layers to this place. And you need to be really careful to not fall into that trap where you're just connecting with the same folks over and over again.
Right.
That was one of the geniuses of Waffle Wednesday. Created a platform for a connection of people across community that allowed for that sort of engagement and building new relationships and all that.
Yep.
And that's really important because it's so easy to fall into these sort of, these cliques and these groups.
For sure.
And in Miami in particular, I found that people can fall into this trap where, everyone knows everyone.
There's so many flavors of the city.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And so so in terms of the work at night, fundamentally built on constantly engaging, constantly reaching out. It's not built on curation. It's built on open source and continual engagement.
What do you feel are some of those important seminal moments that you look back on and like, wow, that was a catalyst for like huge change for the better? Like I look back and like the lab was a big thing, right?
Huge.
Having the lab in Wynwood and making that just like an anchor point for innovation and technology. When you look back at your time at night and all the things that you did and you funded, what are some of the ones that stick out and you're like, man, that really got the ball rolling and that really helped us get to the next phase?
100%. It was such from 12 to then, I left at the, near the end of 17. Or no, from 11, then left at the end of 17, but, launched in 12. I mean, during that stretch, it was just, we were running really, really hard.
Yep.
And it's crazy, right? You look back and pretty much from, an ecosystem standpoint, pretty much everything. I mean, and Refresh had started prior. I had the launch pad, Refresh.
Yeah. Shout out to Brian.
And shout out to Brian.
Yeah.
Just he and Susan. Just
for
pioneering work.
Yep.
I mean, really pioneers the ecosystem. But as we look back now, essentially, these signature pieces of the ecosystem were either brought to Miami or were funded during that period.
Right.
At night.
Yep.
And so in terms of thinking, that's Endeavor, the lab, 500 startups, Babson Women Innovating Now Lab, Waffle Wednesday, the Black Tech Week, the Idea Center at Miami-Dade College.
Emerge Americas.
Emerge Americas. I should have put that up front. Yeah. Emerge Americas, a launch code.
Yeah.
So all of those, Startup Boot Camp, all of those things.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so much fun to think back to many of those things. I remember sitting down with someone saying, want to bring that to Miami. And so to your question about just picking out a few, I think, start with a lab.
Yeah.
Right. So you go back to 2012, there was virtually no co-working in Miami. And so, when Ben and I were sitting down thinking about what are those first things, we sort of drew these buckets about thinking about what are the key things you need in an ecosystem. And one of the first insights is that there are actually a lot of interesting things going on then in Miami, but it seemed very disconnected,
right?
Which is a very common thing. That's not unique to Miami. It's a very common thing to early stage ecosystems.
Oh, sure.
You know, it's like there's just people are all over the place, but you don't have those connection points.
Yeah.
And there was almost no co-working here. So the thought was, we need to create a space where people can work, for at a relatively low cost, have a place to connect with others, and furthermore have a community gathering point.
Right.
And so, it's funny to look back, but I remember walking around, with Ben and Juan Pablo and Marco and Danny Echeverria and going, walking around Wynwood and, walking into this space on 26th Street, which had no windows, and thinking, all right, this is it. Let's do the and of course,
Weefy.
I'm going,
and Danny.
The years,
of course,
Weefy and Danny, who amazing pioneers, who when I was just trying to figure out what to do at Night Foundation, they had launched the lab in a different space around the corner. And I remember going to sit with them. The lab then it was an acronym for Love Art Business?
Love Art Build, maybe, or something.
Love Art Build.
Something like that, yeah.
And meeting with them. And
it was a little room, basically.
Totally.
Yeah.
But you could feel their energy
yes.
And their vision.
Yep.
And so, it's extraordinary thinking back. Weefy could have gone on, stayed in the Northeast, went to UPenn, and, he'd been a Teach for America in DC, but he chose to come back. And he launched the lab. And then, as we're looking around to launch a co-working space, Marco says to me, we connected with these guys, Weefy and Danny, and we want to have them come run this new co-working space. At the time, it wasn't clear what we'd call it.
Right.
And decided to call it The Lab.
Yeah, it's a good name. It works.
It was a great, it was perfect. And immediately, opened it up in early 2012 early 2013, opened it up. Going down memory lane here, remembering this stuff. And there was this right away, this energy, this sense of connection people felt. This was solving a really important problem. People were hungering for it.
Definitely.
And so that, and to go to what we're talking, I mentioned that the thing that Ben and I were talking about so much was that, we need to find ways to drive greater connection. After all, innovation is built on a diversity of people and ideas connecting and colliding.
Absolutely.
How can we do more of that?
Absolutely.
And so this did that. And the thought was, if this can go well, that this is something where, hopefully then we'll see private dollars come in and there'll be a lot more.
Yes.
As we sit here now in 2020, that's happened.
Yes.
Sure. In a big way. Big way.
Yep.
Both from, locally led efforts to, having, big, international players, like WeWork coming in a big way.
Yeah.
But to pipeline, to bureau, to obviously the CIC, all of that.
Yeah.
And so now if you're an entrepreneur looking for a place to hang your hat, to work, to connect, to simply be, we've got that.
You got a lot of choices now.
And so the lab was really important in that journey.
Really important. For me, on the other side of things, as just a resident and a member of the community, I'm born and raised in Miami, right? I've lived here my entire life pretty much. And there never was a place that I felt like I could really go to, like a part of the city that felt like it was more like me. Miami was this tourist destination. You had South Beach and Lincoln Road and all these things, but it never felt like the way you would feel if you went down to San Francisco or to Palo Alto or even to like areas of Boston or New York that had these urban dense areas where, you go back to you're talking about the Paul Graham article, right?
Yeah.
About the things you need, and urban density is a really big part of that. You need a place, and one of the magic of Silicon Valley and San Francisco in general, New York to an extent too, is you have happy collisions with people. Meaning you're at the coffee shop and somebody walks through the door and you say, "Hey, how you doing?
What's up?
Yeah, what are you up to? Oh, you're working on that. I know somebody that could help you." And there's these introductions. A lot of the magic in these communities happen serendipitously.
Yep.
They happen without scheduled meetings. They happen without, preconceived notions. They just happen because you're in close proximity to other makers and doers. We never had anything like that in Miami. Again, it's a big sprawled out city. We talked about different pockets and flavors. Panther Coffee came to Wynwood as the first kind of hipster new age coffee shop that Miami was always, looking for. And then very shortly after that, you guys make a big bet on the lab and bring this anchor for technology and innovation into Wynwood. And Wynwood just became very quickly, well, if there's ever a place where happy collisions are going to happen and I can meet other innovators and people in tech scene, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
So I just want to be around there. Even if, I'm not working on anything. I want to hang out at Panther Coffee and I want to walk around the lab and just see what happens. And you then started to feel this magic around Wynwood being this urban dense place. And now all of a sudden, the people that were in the different pockets, but they were innovators and entrepreneurs or wanted to build businesses, they had a place where there was like a beacon that they could go to, and we never had that before. And I think that was a huge moment that changed things in a big way for the technology scene in Miami.
By the way, your journey was sort of an illustration of exactly what was sort of the hoped for thing that would happen, right? That someone like yourself with Live Ninja that would go from the lab then to you say, you know what, I'm gonna open up my office,
our own office down the street,
the street, right nearby, And that's exactly, and then to say, you know what, and we're going to do something to engage the community, to create more ways that more people can be part of this, or we're not doing the picking, right? We're opening it up to the community, and we're letting the community reveal itself.
Yes.
And to me, sort of good communities, good ecosystems,
for sure,
do that.
Yes.
And so it's like, so your journey is actually like exactly, that's it. That's like that's the sweet spot. That's what we're after.
Yeah, and I mean, it was definitely accomplished because you just saw year after year, the momentum just started building, and not just around Wynwood, but just, there was a lot of activity going on in Brickell. Like we talked about a pipeline, started out, and there was activity
Incredible,
there.
yeah.
And we had Susan with Venture City. What was it called again?
Sure. Well, Susan did Venture Hive in downtown. And then, of course, Laura Gonzalez Estefani left Facebook and started Venture City, which is going strong in
Exactly.
Little Havana.
I'm getting my ventures confused. Yeah.
I know, right?
But the more ventures, the better, right?
Totally.
So we had Susan with Venture Hive, which was great, and a lot of activity going on there. And then Venture City. And now, like you talked about, things with the CIC and all these different things that are happening and all these organizations. And it's been really exciting to see. I mean, we've come a long way in 8 years since 2012, since you started.
Yeah.
So, and I tip my hat to you for all the hard work that you did.
Well, I mean, it's been this collective effort. I mean, it's the thought from the beginning was it needs to be something that's built from the ground up and create an environment where everyone sort of takes ownership of this as their own.
Yes.
Right. Again, going back to you.
Yep.
Right. Whereas that you felt a desire and also felt enabled. Whereas, like, I'm going to start Waffle Wednesday because I want to be part of pushing this community, this ecosystem forward.
Yes.
And so where people do that over and over again.
It was very much, it's always felt this way, and it continues to feel this way, a rising tide lifts all ships mentality here in Miami. And I attribute a lot of that to you, Matt, and the way that you,
appreciate that.
Your energy and your ethos about how to build things, I think was very contagious. So thank you for setting that foundation, and I mean it's continuing to pay dividends. So it's been an amazing journey with Knight Foundation. You did that for 5 years, from 2012 to 2017.
11 fall. It was almost 6 years.
Almost 6 years.
Yeah.
So and by all means, everybody looked at you with great admiration and respect, and you were continuing to do amazing things. You had the support of the entire community, but there was something that was calling you, right? There was some greater source. And by the way, everybody saw Matt, and he was destined for politics because everybody loved Matt. You know what I mean? And people would say, people were like, the next mayor of Miami, or you got to run for Congress. You got to have your hand in doing something. I can't say bigger because you did such amazing things at Knight, so it's hard to say bigger impact. But like at a broader scale, having greater impact. So there was definitely a lot of fans and a lot of proponents and a lot of people applauding you. But what happened? What flicked the switch? What flicked the switch? And you're like, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to run for office.
Well, I mean, I'd say two things. One is I've always just thought about sort of life, that I wanted to lead a life where there were sort of chapters, right?
I love that.
And that, just like when I left law school and, so I had so many friends who were going off to law jobs. I was going to try to find a job in journalism. And that turned out to be really hard because it actually went for, 7 or 8 months looking for a job. Mm-hmm. But I was glad I did that. And that's what going through that period resulted in coming to Miami and working as a journalist. And then after 10 years as a journalist, making the leap to Knight Foundation, and then thinking what to do at Knight Foundation, say, let's go about, trying to help build an ecosystem that helps people, build big ideas and solve important problems. And so I did have in the back of my mind, there'll be another chapter. Yep. I don't know when or what. Although the work at Knight, I loved. I mean, that's the best job I've ever had. And I mean, I love being a journalist, but I especially love the work at Knight Foundation. I mean, launching Endeavor, the first U.S. affiliate ever for Endeavor, and doing it in Miami. Yeah. It just was the best. So, but after the 2016 presidential election, I just found that to be this really alarming moment. I had thought to myself, I know it's not a political program, but I just thought to myself that, people who might say and do certain things, they might come close to being elected president, but we won't actually elect them president. Yep. And so it felt like this, this sort of watershed moment where we had taken this really alarming turn. And then the more I thought about it, and as it happened, it's a quick story. The night before the presidential election, was watching a speech by Hillary Clinton, and she spoke. Bill Clinton spoke. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama all spoke. Mm-hmm. This was her sort of closing event in Philadelphia. And I was watching it with Weefy. I don't know if Weefy even remembers this, but Weefy came over and we were...
I'm going to send him the podcast to jog his memory.
Yeah. And Weefy came over and we're watching it. And we're seeing the final night of the campaign before, the U.S. elects its first woman president. And Weefy's saying to me, he says, you got to get in the game. You got to get in the game. I'm like, no, man, I love what I'm doing, and he said, got to get in the game. But meanwhile, I thought to myself, all things are good, and we're going to actually have this historic event tomorrow. And things took a different turn.
Yep.
And started thinking to myself, well, is this a moment where you do get in this particular game? And so I, just started thinking about it and ultimately thought, well, if you really think there needs to be change, and I was frustrated. It felt like in our politics, it just gotten so caustic, so divisive and such a lack of problem solving.
Yep.
That I thought, if there's ever a moment to raise your hand, this is that time. And furthermore, I want to live a life that includes risk, that includes taking chances and will include, by the way, losing. That's going to be part of the journey. I mean, you see, the most successful people, if you, reading various biographies, whether it's in politics or business or whatever it might be, the most successful people, when you actually dig into their life journey, you often find that it's been filled with real struggle and oftentimes actually really difficult setbacks. And so in any event, I thought, you know what? This is that time. And Annette was on board with it, and she encouraged me to do it. And by the way, we're a bipartisan house. I mean, she's a lifelong Republican. Growing up in Cambridge, you have sort of Democrat stamped on your forehead, right? And
is she a Dolphins fan?
She's a Dolphins fan.
Oh, really? Oh, so you're really bipartisan.
Oh, she's a Yankees fan.
Wow, yeah.
Dude, the whole bit.
I love that. That's just a testimony to the strength of your marriage. Wow. Amazing.
And so, I thought, you know what? This is that time. And spoke about it with Alberto, and he was very supportive. But it did create a decision, a choice, and that was that what I was doing. You can't work at a foundation and be engaged in political activity.
Yeah,
and
a lot of conflict of interest.
Lots of conflicts of interest. I mean, actually, by law, foundations, they have their tax status. And it's built, and one of the requirements is you not engaging in political activity.
Interesting.
And so if I was going to do it, I had to leave. But that I didn't want to leave Knight Foundation. I mean, I loved my job, and I loved the work that you and I, were doing together, and feel like there's so much more to do. But I thought, if I'm going to do this, and I'm going to ask for people's support. And time and effort and all that, I need to be all in. Yeah. And so the idea of saying, you know what, I'm resigning from Knight Foundation and I'm going to run for Congress, which is always a very difficult thing in a long shot. I thought that's the only way to go. And so I packed up, Chris Keynes, who's just amazing, who started with me as an intern and then was associate. And if I had to think about 5 of the most remarkable people I've ever worked with, he would be on that list. And I don't think Chris has yet turned 24. I'm not sure. I mean, he's just, extraordinary. And so Chris and I packed up, my office and walked out and went home and sat in the living room saying, okay, let's figure out how to run for Congress.
Open up Google, right?
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally.
How do I run for office?
I was literally Googling that.
I love that.
It started with things like, what does a campaign look like?
Yeah.
Right? It actually occurred to me, like our efforts to build an ecosystem for entrepreneurs that help, whether it's connection or mentorship or accessing funding or developing new skills, finding talent, all of those things, the entrepreneur's journey and trying to build an ecosystem that helps solve for that. Mm-hmm. I thought to myself, man, we need that in the political, because I was suddenly looking for all of those things in the political context. Where do I find talent? And it was actually hard.
Not a lot of resources.
Not a lot of resources. They're starting to develop, but there really weren't a lot. And so that's 100% right. It was literally Googling, okay, what does a campaign structure, what does campaign manager do? Oh, you're supposed to get people who do like digital and TV and all. Anyway, so there was this really big learning curve. And, one of the things that I look back on where there's just enormous value, thinking back, is that that moment, and you've gone through as an entrepreneur, where you sit in a room and you're by yourself.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, I'm not sure what my next step is.
Yeah.
But I've got to take one.
Right. For sure.
And, I think there's, at one point or another, I think being in those sorts of moments is probably pretty good, because I think you really grow from those moments.
I think failure is the greatest teacher, and not just failure in general, but just like, getting that humility, being humble, figuring out internally, like, what's the next move. Those are really the biggest moments of growth for anybody, right? In every business, there are setbacks and challenges. I mean, you talked about it earlier in the show, the fact that most of the leaders and the people that we respect most in the world have to deal with tremendous, failures and challenges before they go on to do great things. That's part of, doing big, ambitious things in this world.
100%.
Is if you do anything that's ambitious, there's resistance to anything, right? I mean, the world does not take change lightly, because there's an incumbent you're going to piss off. There's a competitor you're going to piss off, and they will fight back against your change. And you have to have perseverance and determination. You have to have a passion for it. You could tell when you were running your campaign how passionate you were, getting your emails every day, and
so
communications and the social media, and then not just the digital stuff, but you went out there and you knocked on doors.
That was my favorite part about
really?
being a candidate.
Was it?
I mean, the things that I loved about being a candidate was first and foremost was talking with voters, right? I mean, just like at Knight Foundation, how the part that I most loved was being out in the community, engaging with people, meeting them where they are.
It's that human connection.
That human connection. Yeah. I loved that as a reporter, and I love that as a candidate. A Sunday afternoon, going door to door in Kendall in 90-degree heat in the middle of summer. Well, my mind never drifted once.
Amazing.
I mean, I felt so present in those moments, and because you're talking with people about what matters to them, their hopes, their fears, their concerns, their anxieties, whatever it might be. And I, as a candidate, I really enjoyed those moments. Now, there are other parts of it that I didn't enjoy. Start with there's a mindset that was very different from the world that you and I, that you and I were in and you're still in,
sure.
And the political world. And that's that we're focused in the entrepreneur world, you're focused on solving problems and embracing ideas wherever they might arise. Right? And that's where I walked into the political world with that view. And thinking that's one of the things that we need in our politics is not going into a problem with a partisan mindset. We're going into solving a problem with an openness to good ideas wherever they might arise to solve the particular thing that we're thinking about, right? That we're addressing. And then what I quickly found is that sort of approach in our politics, it's really hard to bring. That we are in an environment. One is structural, right? So in Florida, it's a close primary state. So if I'm running for the Democratic nomination for District 27 in Congress, which I was, only people who can vote for me are Democrats, right? So suddenly you find you're only speaking to a specific group of of the population. Now, some people like Danette, a lifelong Republican, switched so she could vote for me, which my mother-in-law did the same thing, which I really appreciate.
That's awesome.
But for most people, that is a huge leap. You're not going to go to that trouble. Some very close friends did that, but the broader electorate, they're not going to do that. So for sure, the net result is you're speaking to this group that's already of a particular view. Independents can't even vote for you.
Yeah.
Right? In the primary.
It's a broken system in that sense.
So, and that was a hard adjustment for me because I really wanted, and the thing I loved about being at the work at Knight is being a convener.
It was all inclusive.
Bringing together from all points of view.
Yeah.
And in our politics, it actually starts from a point where it's like everyone's already in their corners.
Yeah.
And that was hard. And that was a struggle for me.
I can imagine. It's a big shift.
It's a big shift.
Yeah.
And you're trying to then find your voice in that environment,
right.
because it's, you can only swim upstream so much.
Right.
You're set in this environment that it's, and it takes a while to sort of figure that out. And one of the things too, and I talk about, when first-time candidates ask me for, people who are running this cycle, ask for me thoughts, is that we need to find ways to shorten that learning curve. Because the thing with running for an elected office is there's no delaying product launch.
You can't.
That is election day is election day, right?
That's right. Can't say hold off another week. We need to fix some bugs. No, you're launching today. Damn it.
That's it. It's right.
Yeah.
And so, I was listening to this thing the other day about Amazon launching Prime. Right. And the team was saying we need more time, and they pushed it back a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Right. But in this case, there's no doing that.
You can't do that.
And why that's a challenge is, I know for me, what I experienced as a first-time candidate, so it was a 13-month campaign.
Mm-hmm.
By month 11 and 12, I felt like I understood the trajectory of a campaign. I understood the different pieces of a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I had become comfortable in my own skin as a candidate. In this political environment, which really is broken, I felt like I had been able to find I found my genuine voice in that environment to sort through, what was a much harder environment than, or less than the environment, the entrepreneur environment is just more intuitive, right? A partisan environment doesn't appeal to me. A problem-solving, inclusive, highly engaging environment, that's the environment I really thrive in, right? But one of the things that I share with particularly people running for the first time is we need to find a way to shorten that learning curve, because to the whole point about there's no delaying product launch, right? And so you need to get yourself in that place fairly early on in a campaign, so that you can be in a place to actually sort of be persuading people, or getting people, having people learn who you are. And then you want to be able to persuade them to actually have to support you.
Right. Because you were saying you didn't really get into the groove until the 11th month, right?
I was certainly those last 3 months or so really felt like, God, I feel like I get this.
Okay, great.
But by that point,
Yeah.
And by the way, I guess two thoughts. One is, we had a unique thing happen in the campaign. This is that, 6 months in, we were thrilled, we had, in terms of our fundraising, which unfortunately is a reality of running, but it is what it is. But we had done very, very well. We had built an incredible team. I mean, the person who had done Obama's digital work, had agreed to come on and work on our campaign, the only congressional campaign he was working on in the country. The person who did all of the TV and strategy in all of Michael Bloomberg's races for mayor of New York City, and now is working on his presidential campaign, was doing all of our strategy and TV work.
Amazing.
We had built up a team of fellows, of dedicated volunteers, that was over 60 people who were out knocking on doors every day. So I was we had the people, the expertise, the resources, and we're figuring it out. Now, the one challenge that came in was that we had that Donna Shalala jumped in. She is someone, former president of the University of Miami, former Clinton cabinet secretary, Secretary of Health and Human Services.
A lot of name recognition.
And that's you nailed it. Yeah. So that's I quickly got an education in this whole dynamic of name recognition in politics. That if someone has name rec, that is a huge advantage. That if you're challenging someone with high name rec, that you need to take that very seriously.
Because a lot of voters go to the polls uninformed, and they're like, "Oh, Donna Shalala, I've heard that before. Sounds good."
No, there's totally a dynamic of people going to voting booths, and if they see a name they recognize, there's a greater chance that they'll vote for that person.
Right.
And so that presented a unique challenge in our particular case. But that said, it's also, if you look back on lots of people who had success in politics, while I'm not running again, it's certainly the case that we've seen examples of it requires a couple runs to understand
Right.
how to do it. Like,
Right.
I mean, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, they all ran
Right.
for offices and lost before they obviously, they couldn't run for a higher office.
Right.
now.
So you could easily say you're par for the course. You're kind of right on track. You ran for the first time, you lost, but that's actually normal, right? As far as, the course of events of what usually happens with a political candidate. You lose the first one, but you win the second one or the third one, right?
100%.
But you've said, I've experienced enough where I know I'd like to focus my efforts on something else.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's great. It's worth being self-aware in that front.
100%.
For sure. Self-awareness, I think, is one of the most important things that people could have in life in general.
I think so. I think so. I think self-awareness is absolutely one of those things. And then having that ability, which you have, is to be able to make that committed step, right? To be able to say, I am going to take this leap, and I am in.
Yeah.
And I, so many parts of being a political candidate I enjoyed, but some other parts too I didn't as much. Whereas the work at Knight Foundation or the work as a journalist, it was hard to think of many parts of those roles that I didn't enjoy.
Right. If somebody's listening to this that are thinking about getting into politics and one day aspires to run their own campaign, what are some of the lessons you've learned running your campaign that you would give to those people?
Yeah. So number one is you have to have a clear understanding of why you want to run. Right. It's not. I think that it can't be about an office. I think it really has to be the why, because running it presents so many unique challenges, and that what will sustain you is that feeling of why I'm doing this, right? That deep understanding of I'm doing it because of X, Y, Z, and when you have that, I think that makes such a difference. Now, I also am of the view that while anyone will tell you if you're going to run, you have to be able to build resources, which is key, and I'm not discounting it. That's true. That is just a reality of the world we're in right now. But I would say that I found a lot of people, when I talked about running, discounted policy as being very important, right? Which is, of course, you are running to be a lawmaker, a policy maker, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's you're sitting on a city council, here, city commissions, county government, state legislature, Congress, whatever it might be.
Yep.
At the end of the day, you are there to solve problems and try to enact, new laws and policies that make our lives and community better, whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. But I was struck by when I ran that so many people said, no one cares about policy. Don't focus on that. Build resources, have a good, clear message, and that's it. And I think all of that is true. You need resources. You need to have a good, clear message, build a good team. All that's 100%. But I would say that a candidate, the really good candidates, they know deeply and clearly why they're doing it. But I would say also that if you have a good grounding in policy, even if you never talk about that policy in a campaign or with a voter, it makes you much more confident because you have a deeper understanding of the problems you're trying to solve. If you're talking about how do we have affordable, quality healthcare accessible to everyone, right? Really having, rather than what can often happen as a candidate, is you are, particularly from each of the parties, will provide sort of position papers on, and you run into this thing where you're sort of parroting positions and not having really sat down and thought about what's my position, what do I think, right? And so I think I would encourage any candidate who's running to not only think, and number one, think hard on the why, but number two, then think hard about what are those problems that you want to solve and how do you want to go about solving them, right? And I think if you can do that well and put that time and effort at the front end, even before declaring, before you even jump in, I think it'll make for an infinitely better experience.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. If you could go back in time and tell yourself something before you started the campaign that you know now, what would that be, if there is any?
Yeah, I have. Let me think about that. But my first thought to that question is that to know those things is you got to do it.
Yep.
Right. So
it's almost impossible.
On the one hand,
you have to live it to learn it.
And the one hand, it feels like in politics, like so many things, it feels like that's the case. You have to live it to learn it, because there are so many points where you're making a decision on things. And that's something where, as a candidate, particularly as you're getting things up and running, you have to make a lot of decisions. And that becomes very hard because you're making these decisions for the first time. You don't have the benefit of experience. And then number two, it's hard because the clock is ticking. Again, going back to the point that there's no delaying product launch. That it's that a day that goes by, it's lost. There's no getting that day back. Right. You can't then sort of get it back by delaying, the release of the product by another week or two.
Right.
And so that creates a challenge, particularly for first-time candidates. And I think there's no substitute other than going through it.
Yep. The experience.
Yep. I felt, in retrospect, I feel like so many of the things that I told myself at the outset came true. This is going to be the hardest thing that you've ever done. It's going to require, a 24/7, 7-day-a-week commitment, which I was all in for. Frankly, I felt my time at Knight Foundation, I had the same approach. I didn't know what the things that I would, I guess, things such as like when I said, I want to carve out, an hour of the day where I just want to have some time on policy. Well, I had, political professionals said, whoa, that's a lot of time, right? Even if you're spending, so to give you, and this is crazy, but I remember, just to give you some perspective on like how you spend your day as a candidate, I remember when I was connected to a former member of Congress. And I said, I'm thinking about doing this. And, and my reasons included that it was really two parts, is that one, that I really felt like we needed new people and new voices and new solutions in Congress. And two, I felt that it was really important that in this political environment to win back the House, and wanted to be part of that, making that happen. And he said, Ace is back. All right. Ace is the best. And this person said, okay, you want to run? Great. Get ready to spend 8 hours a day sitting in a room making fundraising calls. I said, wait, what? I said, no, that's what you have to do. Are you ready to do that? And so it's not talking to voters. It's not thinking about, policy issues, new solutions to how to solve, our thorniest, stickiest problems. It's instead, sitting in a room and making call after call after call. And, that is the reality. Now, what I've learned since then is that you can have the requisite time to fundraise, I think, and have time during the day for voter engagement, out knocking on doors, going to events, different things. And though spending some time every day, I think, better understanding the issues that we're trying to solve and thinking about better ways to solve them.
I love that. That's a great answer. And while we're on the topics of lessons learned, is your role as a journalist. I know that a lot of folks that listen to this podcast are aspiring journalists and people that are going to school for it. What advice would you give for people that are getting started in journalism as well? Yeah.
So, number one, I felt like, as a reporter, and this is along the same lines, so much is built on the doing. Like I remember as a young reporter, I had this real problem where I like to write my stories from beginning to end. So if I couldn't nail my lead, then I wasn't moving on.
That's a blocker.
Yeah. And I want to lead and then get to your nut graph and then, on you go. Right. And so, and I found that, I would be someone I would be at home late at night sweating a story. This is a story if I didn't have a deadline, and I was always blowing deadlines. But, if say the story was due the next day, I'd be up so late, just kept going over and over, and I'm really struggling with it. I found those time went by that I got so much better. And what I realized was it was built on doing.
Right.
Right. And it was, I mean, Gladwell wrote a book about, this, about just, spending the hours required to get really good at something, and in my case, it was getting, reasonably good at something. It's putting that time in.
For sure.
So I think for an aspiring reporter, I would begin to try to tackle stories of different forms, whether it's short form or breaking stories where you're trying to quickly get news out, or whether it's longer form explanatory stories that where you're trying to prompt a reader to think of issues in a new way or highlight something that people have sort of been unaware or really hasn't been at the heart of a particular debate going on out in the community. My recommendation would be try and do as much of that as you possibly can.
I love that.
And that is you just, really try and be out there and embrace all forms of reporting. Like when I first started as a reporter, the things I love to do is to break stories.
Just like the breaking news story continuing to develop. We'll update this as we have it.
I loved it.
Yeah.
To get a story first, to get a scoop, and to get it out there.
That's adrenaline, right?
It's a total rush.
Yeah.
And so I loved it. Now as time went on, I enjoyed doing the stuff. Like, for example, Borrowers Portrayed, which did with Jack Dolan and Rob Barry, and our editor was Mike Sala. That was long-form investigative work.
Yep.
And that was where, we spent, in that case, the better part of 7 or 8 months reporting that out.
Imagine.
It was funny. Yeah. I had people calling saying, are you still working? Is everything okay? And everything was great. But, we were, head down, working on, this multi-part series. And so in that case, you're exercising some different muscles, and that's both on the reporting part. It is much longer in duration. Robert Caro, who wrote, who's finishing his last book in the Lyndon Johnson series, and wrote The Power Broker on Robert Moses. He just recently wrote a book which I highly recommend called Working, where he talked about sort of the craft of reporting and writing. And he started as a journalist before he became an author. And he said he recalled that when he was a reporter and his reporting, and he had an editor who remarked to him, he said, "It's so great to have someone who turns every page," right? And in the reporting that he's going through documents. And he's going through every document, right, and really reporting it out. Now, when you're doing that long-form investigative work, you have the luxury and time of doing that.
That's great, being thorough.
Being really thorough,
yeah.
Right? And so building that skill, but then at the same time, I think as a reporter starting out, learn how to when you have to turn a story quickly, building sources so you can have a real network to be able to find those scoops and to get ahead of those stories. I mean, to me, that was always such a rush.
Yeah.
I loved it.
That's awesome.
But I think it's really built on built on continual doing and trying to engage in different forms of reporting.
I love that.
Yeah.
Just try everything and see what.
I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I think the really good reporters, the reporters who I always admired are the ones who are just, at their core are enormously curious.
Yep. Awesome. That's a great answer. So now, what's next for you, Matt? Like you've had such a great career in so many different arcs and so many chapters. What's the next chapter?
I know, but you're asking about. I do want to share one thing from our Knight Foundation.
Yeah, please.
That and the work that we did together. Around, building the ecosystem and some of the principles that guided our work. I mentioned those breakfasts that we used to do, right? Yep. And one of the things we try to share, what are the principles that are at the foundation of this work? And, the principles and these were things that Ben and I came up with. And it was, build a network from the bottom up, diversity as a core strength.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs over institutions. Starts with the entrepreneur.
I love that.
It's not about going to, while the local universities and other institutions and local governments are really important, it starts, it's all about connecting entrepreneurs, and then you go from there. The funding experiments first and then scaling, right? I mean, in some cases went big. Like we had the opportunity to bring Endeavor to Miami.
Yep.
So, all right, we'll bring Endeavor. But they had
they were a proven model already.
Proven model.
Yeah.
But in other cases, it's like we'll start small and we'll grow.
Make a lot of bets.
Exactly.
Yep.
Make a lot of bets. Don't reinvent if we can import, right? And that is that there are a lot of great things happening.
Yep.
And if we can bring them here, we can do it.
500 startups.
500 startups.
Yep.
It's proven. Let's bring it here.
Right. Love that.
Meanwhile, if we can do Waffle Wednesday, homegrown,
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. Let's make a bet.
Let's make a bet.
Yeah.
100%. And then learn as we go. I think that it's built on constant iteration. Constant learning and changing. So often it seems like when you're thinking about projects around community change, oftentimes it's sort of like spend all this time on the plan.
Yep.
And then sort of works or it doesn't.
Yep.
Right? It's like and obviously you want to be thoughtful. I think about any effort seeking community change. You want to have a theory. But I think it's something where you need to create feedback loops. And then as you're going, be able to have the room to be able to change.
For sure.
Yeah.
And
then fundamental. It's, that fundamental is that, and certainly this was at Knight Foundation. I said it also as a candidate, but say it just in the Knight context. Is that the best ideas come from the community, not Knight Foundation. And so it has to be built on creating platforms, trying to engage as many people as possible, curating, sort of picking, who's in and who's not. Could have a little bit of that here and there, but generally speaking, in building an ecosystem, I don't think it'll work.
No,
particularly a place like Miami.
Right, you need idea exchange. You need that conversation. You need to be active listeners to what the community needs. Right.
You don't know what you don't know.
For sure.
Right, and you have to take that into account.
Yep.
And create ways. I mean, to me, Miami continually reveals itself in ways I never expected.
Yeah,
surprises.
Likewise, and I've lived through my entire life.
Right, you've been here the whole way.
It surprises me every day. So what's next? What are you thinking about as your next chapter?
Yeah, so since the election, I mean, it's interesting thinking. I mean, I viewed this generally as a time of real renewal for me, right? And wanting this as a moment where you can really sort of edit your life.
Yep.
And it's been a time when Danette and I this past year traveled more. I mean, she's got a very busy professional life doing her commercial real estate practice, but we traveled more than we ever have.
It's awesome.
Right? And it was amazing. Staying really engaged in the community. Right now I'm sitting on 6 different boards of different community organizations. From Endeavor to New World Symphony. To Leanne launched an organization called Overtown Connects, and sitting on the community advisory board for that, and loving that. Or participated in MIT Solve, this effort up at MIT, where they take each year they ask 4 questions, and they put those questions out to and invite entrepreneurs from around the world to submit their ideas.
Very cool.
And then a group of entrepreneurs are selected, and they get funding. They get access to the MIT network, and they're highlighted and they're amplified.
Amazing.
Through MIT.
It's a great program.
Doing that sort of work. For sure, want to stay connected, and still very engaged, still sitting on the board and very engaged with Endeavor, with all that's happening around the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Miami.
I love that.
But exploring other things too. Like I mentioned to you, have been part of this effort. We're asking the question about local news and what are the ways that we can improve local news and environment. We've been in this environment now where the internet obviously upended upended news in a big way. You could sort of think about in 2 fundamental ways. It really has impacted journalism and news. Number one is it undermined the revenue model for newspapers around the world. Yep. Number 2, it created a way that the entire news system can be overwhelmed with misinformation.
For sure.
I just got done reading Andrew Morantz's Antisocial book, which I recommend, which really digs into that particular topic. And before, I think we all wondered how far that could go, but now we're actually seeing it can tilt elections.
It can,
and it can look at Myanmar. It can lead to genocide. Right, and so if you take those 2 things, well, let's focus on the first one. That is that the whole issue about it in the internet really undermined the revenue model for newspapers. Well, since the internet first came into being, and we saw this happen, and I saw at the Herald as the newsroom kept shrinking and shrinking. The national and international publications have figured this out. They found a way to make it work. I mean, the New York Times now is more profitable than it's ever been. It's more reporters than it's ever had.
Right, Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal, same way. Yep. I think the same is true. Financial Times, Guardian, Washington Post. Yep. Exactly. And so, and in large part, that's due to the fact that you can connect via the internet with so many more people.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, scalability.
I mean, the scalability is huge if you have a big national or international brand. But for local players, that's much harder. And so we've seen now this environment that's of two worlds. National and international are doing well. Local continues to struggle. In fact, what we're seeing in some communities, we're seeing news deserts.
Oh, for sure.
And that's a real problem, right? That's a problem for democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And so been working with a group here in Miami thinking about, so what are ways to solve that? One of the things been thinking a lot about is that ultimately, do we have market failure as it relates to local news? Right, and that is that we have huge community need, but actually supporting it as a for-profit, market-based effort, will that actually work?
Yep.
And we are seeing some work around the country now where they're saying, you know what, there is market failure, and we need a new model. And one of the models we're seeing experimented in some places, Austin, for example, the Texas Tribune, is a nonprofit model. I mean, it's very not much different from what NPR has been doing for years, but essentially it's saying that we're going to support this effort. For sure, you're going to go to corporate and philanthropic, organizations that want to support this, wealthy individuals, but have something that's membership driven, also events, and taken together can generate the revenues to have, viable, really strong local news sources. We'll see. But we need to figure this one out, and right now engaged in some thinking about ways we can do that.
That sounds really exciting. I think there's a huge need for that. Local news is something, there's a big gaping hole as far as my daily consumption of local news. I hardly get any of it, honestly. There's little drips on Twitter, maybe, if the things
it's
that are
so tough,
locally.
right?
And then you have Nextdoor, which is just crowdsourced and bulletin boards, basically. But there's really nothing that's like really...
Well, I mean,
high quality.
And I've really come around. I mean, with the internet, there's lots of talk about sort of the citizen journalist, right?
Yeah.
And there's certainly, of course, there's a place for that for sure. But I've really come to the view now that I really think that good journalism is built on having, having a group of professional trained journalists out there reporting the news, right? And that for sure there's a space for that citizen journalism, but that's not what's going to get us through. What we need to find ways to support journalists who are doing great work in their communities, and it's their profession. This is what they do.
Right.
And you look today and you see really amazing journalists across Miami, working at the Miami Herald and for other publications, but they're not nearly enough of them right now. And I think that the ones that are out there, that we need to find ways to support them even better.
Oh, I agree. I think it's an incredibly worthwhile endeavor. I would love to see how that.
So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, man.
And that's the thing, for me right now, it's sort of that next chapter. It's been a time of renewal, experimentation, trying to take a time to reorient, right? And just in everything. And of course, in doing that, you also find that there's so many great things.
Of course.
And so embracing what's been so great for so long. I mean, shoot, Danette and I, we're going to, this, it'll be this year that we're going to celebrate. This year we're going to celebrate 15 years of marriage.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah. It's so funny. Thank you. So someone asked me the other day, what are you most proud of in your life? I thought that was a great question, right? Because how do you answer, thing you're most proud of in your life? And my answer to that was my marriage.
Amazing. That's wonderful. That's a beautiful thing, man. And taking this time also to be exploratory in what you want to do next and not feel like you have to rush to anything. So many people, they jump from job to job and they don't have the time to do stuff like this, to take a step back and really determine what it is they want to do next. That's a great thing.
It is a great thing. Now, the one thing that's, in doing this, the one thing that's been interesting is that I was speaking to this group at Watson Institute, which is high up in, they started in Boulder, now they've launched at Lynn University up in Boca Raton. Highly encouraged. We'll take a trip up. Amazing.
Cool, yeah.
And this group of student entrepreneurs, and so talk to them about the work did at Knight Foundation, how, we cooked it up. Ben and I came up with a whole idea of, focusing, because Knight Foundation had never done work focused on building an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and doing that here. And at that time, I don't think any foundations were doing that sort of work. And then the whole journey. And they said, one of the questions asked, they said, well, why did you decide on that when you did? I thought that was a really good question, because what occurred to me was that while I was given time to look around, there was also a bit of a time limit. And I do think in life's journey, though, it is this balancing act of taking the time, but at a certain point, you also have to put that flag in the ground.
No, for sure.
You know?
You got to make your claim.
And that's part of, what's upcoming for me.
Awesome. Very excited. Matt, thank you so much. I mean, no doubt whatever you do next is going to be amazing, just based on what you've done in the past in every phase of your career, from journalism to what you're doing in the Knight Foundation to how you ran for Congress. There's no doubt in my mind that whatever you do next is going to be amazing.
Oh, well, I so appreciate it. Thank you for this time. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
Great.
It's been a blast.
And it's been so much fun to be on this journey with you, man.
Thank you.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like, again, we've done a lot together, and I hope that can continue.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt, for the time.
Thank you.